Imagine enlisting in the United States Army at 20 years old. You leave your family behind. You sacrifice comfort, freedom, and time, all to serve a country you believe in. Now imagine that the greatest threat to your life isn't a battlefield thousands of miles away. It's the man working in the same building as you. On April 22, 2020, Private First Class Vanessa Guillen clocked in for her shift at Fort Hood, Texas. She was never seen alive again. And what the U.S. Army did next, or rather, what they refused to do, would spark a national movement, shake the foundations of military law, and force an entire country to ask one devastating question: who protects the people who protect us? Vanessa Guillen was born on September 30, 1999, in Houston, Texas. She was the fourth of 6 children, raised in a tight-knit Mexican-American family by her parents, Gloria and Rogelio Guillen. From a young age, Vanessa was described by everyone who knew her as fierce, loyal, and full of life. She loved her family deeply. Her sisters Lupe and Myra were her closest confidants. She enlisted in the Army in 2018, motivated by a desire to support her family financially and build a future for herself. She was stationed at Fort Hood, officially named one of the largest U.S. military installations in the world, located just outside Killeen, Texas. Fort Hood was supposed to be the beginning of Vanessa's career. She worked in the armory, the weapons storage room, as an armament specialist. By all accounts, she was hardworking, disciplined, and dedicated. But behind the gates of Fort Hood, something was very wrong. In the months before her disappearance, Vanessa had confided in her family that she was being sexually harassed by a sergeant at the base. She was afraid. And critically, she was afraid to report it. Why? Because she feared retaliation. She feared she wouldn't be believed. She feared the very institution she served would turn its back on her. Those fears were not unfounded. They were not paranoia. They were a warning. April 22, 2020, Fort Hood, Texas. The world was deep in the first wave of COVID-19. The base was on a modified lockdown. Movement was restricted. The base was quieter than usual. Fewer witnesses, fewer eyes. Vanessa reported to the armory room for her shift that morning. Security footage later confirmed she entered the building. She never came out. Her fellow soldiers noticed she was missing. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her room key, her car key, left behind. When her family didn't hear from her that evening, her mother Gloria knew something was catastrophically wrong. By April 23rd, Vanessa Guillen was officially reported as missing. The Army's initial response was troubling. Family members were given conflicting information. Investigators seemed in no rush. There were suggestions, floated quietly, almost dismissively, that perhaps Vanessa had gone AWOL, that she had left on her own. Her family pushed back immediately and forcefully. This was not Vanessa. She would never abandon her family without a word. But the Army wasn't listening. Not yet. As the investigation slowly moved forward, one name began to surface: Specialist Aaron David Robinson, 20 years old, also stationed at Fort Hood. Robinson worked in the same building as Vanessa. He had access to the armory. He knew the layout, the schedules, the cameras, and critically, Vanessa had reportedly identified Robinson as the soldier who had been sexually harassing her. What investigators would eventually piece together was a horrifying sequence of events. On April 22nd, inside the armory room, Aaron Robinson attacked Vanessa Guillen with a hammer, a tool used for weapon maintenance that was readily available in the room. She was struck repeatedly. She was killed. Robinson then enlisted the help of his civilian girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar, to help dispose of Vanessa's remains. Together, they transported her body in bags to a remote area near the Leon River, outside the base, approximately 30 miles from Fort Hood. They buried her. They attempted to burn and destroy the remains. They tried to make Vanessa Guillen disappear, not just from this world, but from memory. For 68 days, Vanessa was missing. For 68 days, her family screamed, cried, and demanded answers. For 68 days, the Army said very little. In the first 2 weeks, the Guillen family was met with silence, dressed up as procedure. They called Fort Hood daily. Sometimes they got answers. Most days, they got transferred, put on hold, or told someone would call back. No one did. Vanessa's mother, Gloria, stopped sleeping. She kept her phone next to her pillow, volume turned all the way up, terrified she'd miss the call that might finally bring her daughter home, or the one that wouldn't. Vanessa's sister Myra began keeping a written log of every conversation with the Army: names, dates, what was promised, what was actually done. She suspected, even then, that no one else was going to keep the record straight. She was right. That's when Vanessa's older sister, Lupe Guillen, made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the case. She picked up her phone, and she started talking, not to a reporter, not to an investigator, to the internet. Her first videos were raw, unscripted, often through tears. She wasn't a media strategist. She was a 20-something-year-old woman, terrified that her sister's case was about to become a closed file in some drawer at Fort Hood. She posted and reposted and posted again. She tagged journalists. She tagged celebrities. She begged anyone with a platform to say Vanessa's name. And slowly, then suddenly, it worked. Other women, current and former service members, began coming forward, not necessarily about Vanessa's case directly, but about their own. Stories of harassment that had gone unreported, of complaints filed and ignored, of fear that speaking up would end careers rather than start investigations. The hashtag #IamVanessaGuillen became something larger than one missing soldier. It became a mirror held up to an entire institution. Within days, the story had crossed from local Texas news into national headlines. Senators began publicly demanding updates. Veterans advocacy groups organized rallies outside Fort Hood's gates. What had started as one family's desperate phone calls had become impossible for the Army to ignore. Fort Hood's public affairs office, once vague and slow to respond, was suddenly fielding daily questions from national reporters. The base held press briefings. Officials chose their words carefully. Too carefully, critics said. Behind the scenes, investigators from the Army Criminal Investigation Division, known as CID, were working the case. But the family had lost faith that the institution investigating itself could be trusted to do so honestly. They were right to be skeptical. It would later come out that complaints about the climate at Fort Hood, about harassment, about a command culture that punished reporting more than it punished offenders, had existed for years before Vanessa ever set foot on the base. Vanessa wasn't the first soldier to feel unsafe there. She was simply the one whose voice, after her death, could no longer be silenced. Back home in Houston, Vanessa's room sat untouched. Her mother couldn't bring herself to move anything. Not her boots by the door, not the small stack of letters on her desk. Each day without news felt like its own kind of cruelty. The family did interview after interview, not because they wanted the spotlight, but because they understood something painful. Attention was the only leverage they had. 68 days is a long time to hope. It's a longer time to grieve without confirmation. The Guillen family lived in that unbearable space, between fear and finality, for over 2 months. And then, on June 30th, 2020, that waiting ended. Exactly 68 days after Vanessa disappeared, her partial remains were discovered near the Leon River by construction workers who stumbled upon them by accident. It was not a triumph of military investigation. It was coincidence, a moment of grim luck. Shortly after the discovery, as investigators closed in, Aaron Robinson fled the scene of a confrontation with police and shot himself. He died on July 1st, 2020, taking many direct answers with him. Cecily Aguilar, however, was arrested. She was charged with conspiracy to tamper with evidence and obstruct justice. She had helped bury Vanessa. She had helped destroy her. The investigation revealed deeply disturbing failures at Fort Hood. Vanessa had reportedly attempted to report the harassment she faced from Robinson, but the system designed to protect her had failed at every level. An independent review, the Fort Hood Independent Review Committee, was commissioned in the aftermath. Its findings, released in December 2020, were scathing. The report confirmed a toxic culture at Fort Hood. It found that sexual assault and harassment rates were significantly underreported, that leadership had failed to address complaints, and that the command environment actively discouraged soldiers from coming forward. 14 commanders and senior leaders at Fort Hood were suspended or fired as a result. In July 2022, Cecily Aguilar was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, one of the harshest sentences in a case tied to a military sexual harassment scandal. But the Guillen family had not just fought for punishment, they had fought to change the system that failed Vanessa, and every soldier like her. The most powerful legacy of Vanessa Guillen's story is legislative. Her family, led by her sister Lupe and attorney Natalie Kawam, pushed relentlessly for a law that would reform how sexual harassment is handled in the military. In December 2021, Congress passed the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. The law fundamentally changed military justice by making sexual harassment a criminal offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for the first time in history, removing commanders from the process of deciding whether to prosecute sexual assault cases, handing that power to independent prosecutors, establishing stronger protections and resources for survivors. It was the most significant reform to military justice in decades, and it happened because one family refused to let their daughter be be forgotten. Vanessa Guillen was 20 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She loved her family, she served her country, and she deserved protection from the very institution she gave her life to. She didn't get it in time, but because of her family's courage and the world's refusal to look away, thousands of soldiers who come after her will have a safer path, a louder voice, a system that is, at least, a little more obligated to listen. Vanessa's final statement wasn't spoken in a courtroom. It was written into law. If this story moved you, share it. Someone needs to hear it. And as always, this has been the final statement. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on the evil seemingly all around us.